It feels like yesterday, but it's been months now. Thomas, my older brother, passed away suddenly. He was only 55, in the prime of his life, or so we thought. We were all shocked. There was no warning. He'd had some minor health issues in the past, but no one could have foreseen a heart attack taking him away like that. It was supposed to be my younger brother, Nathan, the one with the health problems, not Thomas. But life doesn't give you any warnings, and I was thrust into the middle of the storm without any preparation. I can still see that phone call in my head, my hands trembling as I heard the news. "Thomas is gone, Em. I'm so sorry." Those words hit me harder than I expected. They felt unreal, and yet here I was, reeling in shock, trying to pick up the pieces. In the immediate aftermath of his death, everything became a blur. The funeral was rushed. We didn't know what to do, how to proceed. The family was scattered, but I knew it was my responsibility to handle things. Everything from the practical arrangements to the emotional support. After all, I was the oldest sibling and the one who always managed to keep things together when the chaos started. But this time, I felt like I was drowning. Thomas's death left a gaping hole in the family. My sister-in-law, Maria, was in complete shock. My niece, Grace, was barely holding it together. But it was Charlie, my nephew, who truly had me worried. Charlie had always been, well, a lot to deal with. He had that spoiled, entitled streak in him ever since he was a little kid. He was the golden boy, the one everyone always thought would take the reins, keep the family legacy alive, and just know how to handle things. But now, as I looked at him in those first few days after Thomas's death, I saw something darker, something less assured. He seemed shaken, like he knew that this family and its legacy was slipping out of his grasp. And to be honest, I was a little nervous about how he would handle it. But what happened next? I wasn't prepared for that. As the days went on, the reality of Thomas's passing hit us all in waves. The funeral was done, and now we had to face the real question. What happens next? Thomas hadn't left a will. I remember staring at the blank space on the legal documents and feeling a cold pit form in my stomach. Thomas, the one who always planned ahead, always took care of everything, had failed to make one crucial decision. There was no legal will, no clear direction. It was as if he had left behind a trail of dust, and now it was up to me to figure out how to clean it up. But that's when I learned something that shook me to my core. Thomas had named me the executor of his estate. I couldn't believe it. Of all people, why me? I wasn't even the one who lived closest to him. I had my own life, my own responsibilities. My siblings were all so much more involved in Thomas's day-to-day life. And yet, here I was, holding the papers, staring at my name on the dotted line. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I knew I had no choice but to follow through. It was a responsibility thrust upon me, and as his executor, I would be in charge of making sure his debts were paid, his assets were distributed, and that the family home, our childhood home, was taken care of. Charlie, of course, was the first to find out about it. He was there when I uncovered the papers, and I remember the look on his face when I explained the situation to him. At first, he was confused. "Wait, what do you mean you're the executor? You? Why would he pick you?" His voice wavered with disbelief, and I could tell that the reality of the situation wasn't sinking in. But soon, it was clear that something in him was changing. Something ugly was bubbling up beneath the surface. The conversation turned heated quickly. "This isn't right, Aunt Em. You're not supposed to be in charge of this." Charlie's voice grew louder, and his face turned red. "I'm the one who should have the house. I'm his son. I'm the one who should have inherited everything. This is mine, not yours." I was stunned. I had never seen Charlie like this before. Sure, he had his moments of arrogance when he was younger, but nothing like this. This was an anger, a sense of betrayal, that felt completely out of proportion. I tried to calm him down, explain that this wasn't personal, that I wasn't taking anything from him, but he wasn't listening. His eyes burned with anger, and I could see that something had snapped inside him. "You're not doing this right," Charlie kept shouting, pacing around the living room like a caged animal. I had every right to this. I was always supposed to get it. He was shaking his head, his voice rising with every word. It was almost like he believed that the house, the family estate, was owed to him simply because he was Thomas's son. The entitlement that had always simmered under the surface now boiled over into full-blown fury. My own heart started to race. I tried to keep my composure, but I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. I wasn't the one who had created this mess, but at that moment it didn't matter. The family's finances, the house, the legacy of Thomas, everything had somehow become my responsibility, and Charlie wasn't going to let it go. He started accusing me of trying to steal from him. "I know what you're doing. You're just trying to get the house for yourself. You've always wanted it. You've always been jealous of what I had," he raged. "You've been plotting this for years." It was like a slap to the face. I had never been jealous of Charlie, but suddenly it was as if all the resentment he had been holding onto for years was unleashed. The anger, the hurt, the sense of betrayal, it was all there in his voice, and I could do nothing but stand there in shock, trying to absorb it. The Charlie I knew, the smart, funny, charming young man, was gone, replaced by someone who felt entitled to everything his father had left behind. That was when I realized something had changed, not just between us, but within him. I wasn't just the aunt trying to help him through a hard time anymore. I was the enemy. I was the one standing in the way of his inheritance. As I stood there, watching him rage, I felt like I was drowning. The weight of my brother's estate, of all the responsibilities that came with it, pressed down on me. I had never wanted this role. I had never asked for it. And yet, there I was, with everything spiraling out of control. Charlie wasn't just angry, he was hurt. And now I was caught in the middle of a family feud that was only just beginning. I couldn't help but wonder, what had Thomas really been thinking when he named me as the executor? Why had he put this on my shoulders? And what would Charlie do next? I didn't know the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. This battle over the family estate was far from over. The tension had been building for days after Thomas's funeral, but it all came to a head during that family meeting. I had invited everyone over, thinking it was the right thing to do, to sit down and try to figure out the next steps. We needed to clear the air. We had to sort out what was going to happen with the estate, with the house, and with all the assets Thomas had left behind. It was supposed to be a calm discussion, just us family members talking about the future, but I should have known better. When emotions are this raw, calm rarely comes. I had no idea how the conversation would play out, but I had hoped we could at least start with some understanding. My sister-in-law Maria was there, sitting quietly on the couch, her face pale, her eyes red from days of crying. Grace, my niece, was a little more composed, but her eyes kept darting toward Charlie, as if waiting for him to blow up again. And then there was Charlie, my nephew, sitting at the edge of the table, staring me down like I had betrayed him personally. We all took our seats, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing on me. No one wanted to speak first, but eventually I had to break the ice. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Look, I know this is hard for all of us, but we need to talk about what's going to happen now. The house, the estate, it's all in limbo. I know it's overwhelming, but we have to figure this out together." Charlie's face twisted into a mask of frustration. He leaned forward, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "You don't get it, Em," he snapped, his voice shaking with anger. "This is mine. I should have had it all along. You were never supposed to be the one in charge. My dad promised me the house. He always said I'd take over." I tried to stay calm, but my heart was pounding in my chest. This wasn't going how I had imagined it at all. "Charlie," I said softly, trying to reason with him. "Thomas didn't leave a will. We're all trying to figure this out. The only thing he left was me as the executor. That's the law. I'm just following the rules here." He shook his head furiously. This is bullshit. I don't care about the rules. You're taking everything from me. His voice cracked on the last word, and I saw his face turn bright red, his chest heaving with barely contained rage. You've always been the one with the control, haven't you? You've always been the responsible one. You've always been the one to make decisions. But this is my family, my inheritance, not yours. I could feel the heat in my face as my own anger started to rise. I had never seen Charlie like this. Never. Sure, he was always a little entitled, but this wasn't just entitlement. This was a full-on meltdown. I didn't want to escalate things, but I couldn't stay silent either. Charlie, calm down. I'm not trying to take anything from you. This isn't personal. I'm doing what Thomas asked me to do, and I'm trying to do it the right way. Right way, Charlie shot back, his voice practically shaking with fury. There's no right way, Em. You're stealing from me. You're using this whole executor thing to get your hands on everything. Don't act like you're the victim here. I stood up, my hands trembling with the mix of frustration and fear. This isn't about me. This is about making sure everything is handled correctly, fairly. I'm not here to steal from you. I'm here to keep things together. You need to understand that. Maria finally spoke up from the corner of the room, her voice barely above a whisper. Charlie, please. You need to listen. Emily's doing what's best. It's not her fault. Charlie whirled around to face her, his eyes wild with anger. Stay out of this, Maria. You're just as much a part of the problem. You don't get it either. No one gets it. His fist slammed down on the table, making the silverware clatter. I'm done with this family. You're all against me. I'll take what's mine, no matter what. The words hit me like a slap in the face. He was spiraling out of control, and I couldn't get through to him. All I could think was that we were on the verge of something worse, something I couldn't control. I had to do something before this escalated further. But what? For a moment, there was a heavy silence. Grace, my niece, was looking at me like she was waiting for me to fix everything, but I could see the fear in her eyes too. She was afraid of Charlie, afraid of what he might do next. The entire room felt suffocating, like we were all trapped in a pressure cooker just waiting for the lid to explode. Charlie stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back with a loud crash. I'm done, he spat. I don't need any of you. If you think you're going to take what's mine, you're wrong. I'll make sure of it. I didn't know what to say. The words caught in my throat, and I felt my knees weaken beneath me. I had hoped, no, wanted to be able to handle this calmly. I wanted to believe that we could work through this together, that this would just be a bump in the road. But the anger in Charlie's eyes, the rage and betrayal he felt, this wasn't something I could fix with just words. I watched as Charlie stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I sat back down, my heart still racing, the reality of the situation sinking in. What had just happened? What had I gotten myself into? The inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about control, and Charlie wasn't going to let it go easily. As I sat there, trying to steady my breath, I knew things were only going to get worse from here. There was no going back now. The family was fractured, and I wasn't sure how or if things could ever be mended. And I realized something in that moment that hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't just about the estate. This was about something deeper, something I wasn't ready to face. We were all in over our heads, and the worst was yet to come. That night, everything changed. I had just finished cleaning up after the chaotic family meeting, my mind still racing, replaying every word Charlie had said. I kept trying to understand where everything had gone wrong, how I had gone from being his aunt, someone he trusted, to the enemy in his eyes. But as I sat alone in the living room, exhausted and trying to process the anger I had just witnessed, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone stomping through the front yard. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. It was Charlie. I had barely processed the situation earlier in the evening. But now, as the tension lingered, I felt like something was about to break. My instincts kicked in, and I stood up, walking to the front door, still trying to calm myself down. But as soon as I opened it, I was hit with a wave of fear like nothing I had ever experienced. Charlie was standing there, a look of pure rage in his eyes. His face was red, his fists clenched at his sides. He wasn't alone. He had a shotgun in his hand, and it was pointed directly at me. My breath caught in my throat. I had never seen Charlie like this before. He was always a little volatile, sure, but this was something else entirely. "Charlie," I managed to whisper, my voice shaking, as I slowly backed up into the hallway. "What are you doing? Put the gun down. This isn't you." His laugh was hollow, twisted with anger. "This isn't me," he spat. "You think I'm some kind of joke? You think I'll just sit back and let you take everything from me? You've been stealing from me my whole life, and now you're taking what's mine, again." I tried to steady myself, focusing on keeping my voice calm, knowing that I couldn't show fear, but it was impossible. My body was trembling uncontrollably, and my mind was racing. "Charlie, listen to me," I said, holding my hands out in a gesture of peace. "You don't want to do this. This isn't the way. Whatever you think, I'm trying to do what's best for everyone here. This isn't about me taking from you." But he wasn't listening. His eyes were wild, and the shotgun trembled in his hands as his anger boiled over. "You think you can just control everything? You think this is your decision? You think I'm going to let you walk away with it all just like that?" I took another step back, my back now pressed against the wall, the weight of the situation settling in. I didn't know what to do. I had never been in a situation like this. A million thoughts ran through my head. I had to get the gun away from him. I had to calm him down before it was too late. He took another step toward me, his grip tightening on the gun. "You never gave a damn about me. Never. You always thought you were better than me, didn't you?" His voice was raw with emotion, and I could see the hurt underneath the anger. It was like a switch had been flipped. And this wasn't just about the estate anymore. This was personal. The years of resentment, the things unsaid, the way I had always been the stable one while he struggled to find his place. It was all coming to a head in the worst possible way. "Charlie, please," I begged, my voice cracking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't want any of this. But we can't fix things like this. Please just think about what you're doing. This is crazy." But he wasn't thinking anymore. He was lost in the heat of the moment, consumed by the years of pain and frustration that had built up. The shotgun shook in his hands, but his eyes were locked onto mine with a coldness I had never seen before. I could feel the weight of the weapon, the imminent danger hanging in the air between us. And then, without warning, I heard the sound of a car door slam outside, followed by the unmistakable click of a door opening. It was subtle, but it was enough. I knew that sound. I had only made the call minutes earlier, but I had called the police. They were here. Charlie's eyes flickered toward the sound, and in that instant, I saw the hesitation in his face. His grip on the shotgun loosened for just a second, but it was enough for me to take a quick step back and prepare myself for what was about to happen next. I couldn't believe this was happening. I had hoped, prayed, that it wouldn't come to this, but now the reality was staring me down. Charlie looked back at me, his gaze filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You had the cops called on me," he snarled, his voice venomous. "So this is how it ends? You think you can just have me arrested, take everything, and walk away like nothing happened?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was still reeling. I had no idea how it had gotten this far, how I had gone from trying to help him to being threatened by him in my own home. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just fear I felt anymore. It was anger at the situation, at the way this had escalated, and at the way he was treating me. He wasn't the young nephew I used to know anymore. He was someone else, someone I didn't recognize. Before I could even speak, the door flew open, and 2 officers rushed in, their guns drawn, but they weren't pointing them at me. They were pointing them at Charlie. "Step away from the weapon," one of the officers shouted, his voice commanding and firm. For a split second, Charlie hesitated. His eyes darted from the officers to me, and in that brief moment of silence, I saw the panic rise in his chest. He dropped the shotgun to the floor, his hands shaking as he slowly raised them into the air. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "This isn't how it was supposed to happen." The officers moved quickly, handcuffing him and guiding him toward the door. I stood there, frozen, my body still trembling as I tried to process what had just happened. My mind couldn't wrap around it. 1 minute, I was trying to have a conversation with my nephew, and the next, he was threatening me with a shotgun in my own home. As Charlie was escorted out of the house, his face twisted with anger and disbelief, I felt a wave of numbness wash over me. My heart was still pounding, my hands still trembling, but I couldn't find any tears. No, this wasn't the moment for that. This was the moment I realized just how far things had gone, just how deep the wounds in my family were. And I knew, deep down, that the path ahead was going to be even more difficult than I had imagined. What had started as a fight over money had turned into something far more dangerous.
Charlie wasn't just angry about the inheritance anymore. He was angry at me, at everything I represented, at the years of bitterness that had built up in him, and I didn't know how or if our family could ever heal from this. The chaos of the moment still hadn't sunk in as the officers gently moved Charlie towards the door. I was frozen in place, trying to process the unbelievable scene that had unfolded in my living room.
The weight of everything, the confrontation, the shotgun, the accusation, pressed heavily on my chest, and my breath felt like it was stuck in my throat. I had been right to call the police, but in that instant, I couldn't bring myself to feel any relief. Not yet. The feeling of betrayal still clung to me, thick and suffocating. As Charlie was guided out, I stood there, trying to piece together what had just happened. I had never imagined things would escalate this way, and the anger and disbelief in his eyes still haunted me. Part of me wanted to yell at him, to demand answers, to shake him and ask why it had to come to this, but I was paralyzed. All I could do was watch as he was led outside, his body language angry but defeated. The officers remained calm, professional, never once letting their guard down as they made sure he was out of the house and safely in the back of the squad car. The door slammed behind them, and the silence that followed was deafening. My legs were weak, and I collapsed onto the couch, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The shock of the moment lingered, and it was hard to breathe in the quiet aftermath. But in the stillness of my living room, I didn't notice one thing. Someone was still there. I was so caught up in the wreckage of what had just happened that I didn't realize an officer was still standing in the doorway, observing the scene with a quiet intensity. I hadn't seen him approach, but now, in the aftermath, his presence became clear. He was waiting. It was then that I noticed his calm gaze. His stance was relaxed, but there was a knowing in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. He wasn't rushing to talk to me, wasn't forcing me to explain myself. He just stood there, watching. The quiet authority in his posture was the only thing that gave me a sense of control in that moment. Somehow, his mere presence reminded me that there were people out there who understood that things weren't as simple as they seemed. I wasn't alone in this. The officer stepped into the room, his tone gentle but firm. "Are you okay, ma'am?" I nodded, unsure of what to say. I wasn't okay. How could I be? My family was falling apart, and the nephew I once cared for had just threatened me with a weapon. The very idea of it still felt like a dream, something that couldn't possibly have happened. "We're going to need a statement from you," the officer continued. "But take your time. This is a lot to process." I appreciated the officer's calm demeanor. He didn't rush me, didn't push for information when I was barely holding it together. Instead, he allowed the room to sit in the heavy silence, letting me gather my thoughts before speaking. And as I looked at him, I realized that this wasn't just a police response to a call. It was a reminder that there were systems in place. There were people trained to deal with situations like this, to protect people like me who were caught in the middle of a storm they hadn't seen coming. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to collect my thoughts before I spoke again. I didn't know what else to do, I said softly, my voice hoarse. I didn't think it would escalate like this. I thought we could handle it, that I could handle it. The officer nodded understandingly. You did the right thing, he reassured me. No one should ever be put in a position like that. I could feel the tension in my body beginning to ease, but it wasn't relief. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the harsh reality that I had to face. The officer didn't rush me, didn't try to make me feel better with empty words. Instead, he simply stayed with me in the moment, and in that quiet exchange, I realized something crucial. I had been making decisions in isolation for so long. I had taken it all on myself, the responsibility for my family, the burden of trying to keep the peace. But now, in this moment, I understood that I wasn't in this alone. The officer, the law, the people who were trained to help in these situations, they were here to ensure I wasn't just a victim of this chaos. I wasn't powerless anymore. I stood up slowly, taking in a shaky breath, and glanced back at the empty hallway where Charlie had just been. His departure felt like a weight had been lifted, but there was a strange emptiness in its wake. The house was quieter now, more solemn, but even as the adrenaline ebbed away, the truth remained heavy. Charlie was angry, and there was no way of knowing what would come next. The situation was far from over, but one thing had changed. In that moment, I wasn't alone anymore. There were forces at play beyond the immediate chaos, forces that had been silently waiting in the background, ready to intervene when things went too far. I had called the police, yes, but I also realized that I wasn't the only one watching. I wasn't the only one aware of what had happened, and I wasn't the only one who could step in when things fell apart. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had someone on my side who knew how to handle the mess my family had created. And that was the first small glimmer of hope I had felt all night. The sound of the door closing behind Charlie still echoed in my head. It was a strange mix of finality and disbelief. As the officers guided him outside, I felt a tension I hadn't realized I was holding in my body begin to release. The overwhelming shock was slowly giving way to something else, something far more complex. The adrenaline that had been coursing through me now left me feeling empty, like I had just run a marathon, and the finish line had disappeared the moment I crossed it. I stood still, my eyes fixed on the empty space where Charlie had just been standing. It felt surreal, like I was watching the scene unfold from a distance, unable to grasp that it was really happening. My heart was still racing, my hands shaking, but there was no immediate danger anymore. The police had taken control. Still, a part of me couldn't help but think that Charlie wasn't entirely gone from my life. His betrayal would linger much longer than this single night. The officers spoke in low tones, their professional demeanor never faltering as they moved to secure the area. I heard one of them speaking with a calm authority, but my mind was still wrapped up in everything that had just occurred. I couldn't focus on their words, not yet. I needed a moment. I needed to breathe. It wasn't until one of the officers, the one who had spoken to me earlier, turned back to me and said, "Ma'am, we'll need to take a formal statement from you about everything that transpired. When you're ready, we can begin the process." I nodded numbly, trying to hold myself together. I understand, but can we just wait a bit?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I need to process this. I didn't expect this to happen." The officer's eyes softened. "Of course, take your time. We're here if you need anything." As he stepped out to join his partner, I finally let myself collapse onto the couch, my hands buried in my face as I struggled to process what had happened. Charlie, my nephew, the boy I had watched grow up, the boy I had once thought of as my own son. And now, in a single moment, He had pointed a shotgun at me. I could hardly wrap my mind around it. And that was when it hit me. The police were gone for a moment, but I was left with something much more dangerous than the fear of Charlie's anger. I was left with the aftermath of this entire situation, the reality of everything that had been simmering beneath the surface. The years of family tension, the underlying resentment, the selfishness, and the lies. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It never had been. The estate, our family's legacy, had been torn apart before it could even pass into anyone's hands, and I now had to pick up the shattered pieces. I realized that Charlie's violent outburst wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. It had been building for years, fed by the promises made to him, the misconceptions, the hidden debts that no one had bothered to mention, and my own silence in the face of it all. As I sat there, feeling numb and confused, I realized I needed to face something even harder than Charlie's anger. I needed to confront the truth about my brother's will, about the estate, and about the secrets that had been buried deep beneath the surface. I walked into the other room where my brother's things were scattered. His papers, his financial records, the remnants of a life now gone. It wasn't just about finding the missing documents. It was about understanding what had happened to my family, what my brother had left behind, and why Charlie had been led to believe he was entitled to everything. The weight of it all crashed over me as I sifted through papers, old bills, and legal documents. I hadn't been prepared for what I would uncover. The estate wasn't as secure as we had all believed. Hidden debts, investments gone bad, loans that no one had told me about. It was a tangled mess. And Charlie, in his naive desperation, had only seen the promise of the estate, not the reality of it. But what shocked me the most were the letters. My brother had made some decisions that he never discussed with me, decisions that left Charlie feeling entitled. But they were built on nothing more than empty promises. Promises that were never legally binding, just casual words thrown around by a man trying to keep his son happy, trying to make up for years of emotional distance. I could feel my hands trembling as I turned the pages of a letter from my brother to Charlie. In it, my brother had expressed his desire for Charlie to have it all, to inherit everything. But the letter had been written in a moment of weakness, not backed by any legal action. No will, no trust, no final declaration. It was all empty words, and now it had led to this, led to a broken family and a young man on the edge. As I read those words, a bitter sense of clarity washed over me. I understood now why Charlie had snapped. He had been fed lies, just like I had. We were all caught in a web of misunderstandings and expectations that had been set without regard for the real situation. My brother, in his own way, had tried to compensate for his own failings by promising a future he couldn't deliver. But it was too late. The damage was done. Charlie hadn't just lost his claim to the estate. He had lost the family that had once been there for him. And now, so had I. Sitting back in the chair, I took a deep breath. This was just the beginning. There was so much more to unravel, so much more to understand about what had really happened. But I couldn't just let it all slip away. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful. It wasn't just about the estate anymore. It was about everything that had led us here, and it was up to me to figure out how to move forward from this point. The house was eerily quiet. The silence that filled the air felt like a weight, pressing down on me as I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by piles of my brother's documents. It had been hours since the police had left, taking Charlie with them. My hands still shook slightly, though the adrenaline rush had long faded. The shock, though, hadn't worn off. In fact, it felt like the ground beneath me was still shifting. Unsure of where to settle, I wasn't ready to go to bed yet, not with everything hanging in the air. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I hadn't planned on digging into my brother's finances the way I had, but the situation had forced my hand. The more I flipped through his papers, the more I realized how much I didn't know. I always thought I had a clear picture of my family's finances, of the legacy my brother was leaving behind. I never questioned it, Why would I? Thomas had always been the strong one, the reliable one, the one who handled the business side of things. And I had trusted him. I trusted him with everything. But now it was like the veil had been pulled back, and the truth I hadn't been allowed to see was staring me in the face. As I sifted through his old bills, tax documents, and legal papers, I noticed patterns, or rather, the lack of them. There were discrepancies, huge discrepancies. Investments my brother had made that seemed to disappear with no trace. Loans that never showed up in the balance sheet. There were also personal debts that weren't listed anywhere. Debts that Thomas had clearly kept hidden from me. Why hadn't he told me? Was he trying to protect me, or was he hiding something more sinister? I found an old set of documents, my brother's will and trust papers, which should have been clear-cut. But there it was. No mention of Charlie inheriting everything. No mention of me being named the executor. It was like he had been keeping secrets even after his death. His will was vague, filled with ambiguous language that I knew would be the subject of legal battles for years to come. But nothing concrete. Nothing that would make Charlie feel entitled to what he had believed was his. Then there was a letter. It was an old one, written by Thomas himself, tucked between two folders of financial statements. My heart skipped as I opened it, recognizing my brother's handwriting. It was dated just a few months before his death, and it was addressed to Charlie. Charlie, I know you're eager to take over the estate, and I want you to know I've always wanted you to have it. But there are things in motion that you don't understand yet. The business has been struggling, the debts are larger than you think, and the inheritance isn't what you expect it to be. I'm doing what I can to prepare things for you, but I need you to trust me, please. The letter was both a reassurance and a warning. It confirmed everything I had suspected but never dared to ask. My brother had been trying to protect Charlie from the truth, but in doing so, he had created an illusion that had torn apart the family when reality struck. Charlie had been led to believe that he was entitled to everything, but he had been misled by my brother, by his own father. Tears pricked at my eyes as I read the letter again. How had it come to this? Why hadn't Thomas trusted me enough to tell me the truth? If he had been upfront, if he had explained the mess we were in, maybe Charlie wouldn't have ended up at my door with a shotgun. Maybe this whole nightmare could have been avoided. But now it was too late for those answers. The damage was done, and I was left holding the pieces. I didn't know what to do with all of this information. The letter, the documents, the debts. I felt like I was sinking in a sea of half-truths. The more I uncovered, the more questions I had. What had my brother been thinking? What had Charlie been told? Had they all been blind to the reality of our situation? There were still more documents to go through, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper I went, the more lost I became. My mind kept circling back to the same question. What now? What was I supposed to do with this information? The inheritance battle had spiraled into chaos, and it felt like the foundation of my entire family was crumbling beneath me. I knew I couldn't let Charlie's misguided sense of entitlement control the narrative. But what would happen when the dust settled? Could I repair the damage that had been done to my family? Would Charlie ever be able to forgive me for taking the estate away from him, when all he had ever known was that it was supposed to be his? The more I thought about it, the less clear the answers became. But one thing was certain, I couldn't turn back now. The truth had been revealed, and it was time to confront the past, no matter how painful it might be. As much as I wanted to escape the mess, I knew I had no choice. I had to face it head-on, for my family, for Charlie, and for myself. I took a deep breath, my eyes still scanning the endless stacks of papers in front of me. There was more work to do, more questions to answer, but tonight at least, I would find some peace in knowing that I was taking the first steps toward clearing away the rubble. I never thought being an executor of a family estate would feel like this. The weight of it had settled on me like a heavy coat, one I couldn't take off, no matter how badly I wanted to. The documents had been filed, the lawyer had been contacted, and the truth had been uncovered. Yet the responsibility I felt now was unlike anything I had imagined. What started as a family matter that I thought I could navigate with ease had turned into something far more complicated, something far more painful. I stood in the living room of my childhood home, gazing around at the family portraits lining the walls. There we were, Thomas and me, my parents, Charlie when he was just a little boy, full of life and hope for the future. The memories seemed to stare back at me, reminding me of who we used to be. Back when family meant love, not money. Back when we didn't get tangled in the messes we've made today. Now, the house felt too big, too silent, like a tomb holding the remnants of a past I could never reclaim. Every object in this place had a story. My mother's old rocking chair by the window, the antique lamp Thomas always insisted on keeping in the entryway, the vase Charlie had knocked over one too many times as a child. They all carried weight, but it was different now. They were no longer just sentimental reminders of family. They were burdens. Each one carried with it the heavy responsibility I had inherited when Thomas passed. I had thought that being named the executor would be an honor. I'd always taken care of things. I had helped Thomas with the business before he got sick, managed the finances after our parents died, even taken on the brunt of the emotional work with Charlie when he'd struggled. I thought I could handle this. I thought I could fix it. But nothing had prepared me for the magnitude of it all. The more I went through the motions of executing the will, the more I realized how much Thomas had left undone. So many loose ends. So many secrets. And now it was up to me to tie them up, to somehow make sense of all the chaos. I had to manage a family at war, a broken legacy, and the expectations of a nephew who saw me as the enemy. What had once been my brother's world was now mine to fix, or at least try to. I sat down at the kitchen table, the papers strewn out before me like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite piece together. The legal language, the bills, the statements, they all blurred together. They didn't make sense. They never made sense. How was I supposed to make decisions that impacted the future of an entire family when I could barely make sense of the past? There were moments when I wanted to scream, when I wanted to walk away and let someone else deal with it. Let the lawyers figure it out. Let Charlie fight for what he thought was his, even though it was all a lie. But I couldn't. I couldn't just leave it behind. This wasn't just about an estate. It was about my family, and as much as it hurt, as much as I wanted to, I couldn't walk away. I thought about Charlie. I thought about the boy he used to be, the boy I had raised alongside my brother. He had been like a son to me, and I had loved him like my own. But now, he was a stranger, someone so consumed with anger and entitlement that he couldn't see the bigger picture. He couldn't see that I wasn't the one who had taken everything from him. I was the one who was trying to put the pieces back together, even if it meant I had to do it alone. And then there was Thomas, my brother, the man who had always been there for me, who had promised to take care of everything. His sudden death had torn everything apart, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. It was a burden I didn't ask for, a weight I didn't want, but it was mine. I felt the weight of my role settle deeper, like a stone pressing down on my chest. I wasn't just an executor. I was the person who had to make sure the family didn't completely fall apart. But could I do it? Could I really hold this family together when everything seemed so broken? I wasn't sure. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had gotten here. I had always been the responsible one, the one everyone turned to for help. But this wasn't something I could fix with a smile or a kind word. This wasn't a problem I could solve by offering a hug or a simple piece of advice. This was a war that had started long before I ever knew the battle lines were being drawn. And now I was in the middle of it. I ran my hand through my hair and exhaled slowly. There was no going back. The responsibility was mine, and I had to find a way to make it work. For Thomas, for Charlie, for myself. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where we had spent so many summers. Laughing and talking, that garden felt like a lifetime ago. I wondered if there was any way to go back to that simpler time when family wasn't about inheritance, greed, or broken promises. But that was a dream now. The reality was different, and I was the one who had to face it head on. There was no way out. Not now. I had to carry the weight, even if it broke me, even if it tore me apart. Because that's what family does, right? They expect you to bear the burden, to hold it all together when everything is falling apart. And maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to do that. To honor Thomas's memory, to protect Charlie from himself, and to finally put the pieces of our fractured family back together. I took one last look at the house, at the past. And then I turned back to the papers. The work was just beginning, and there was no turning back. The family meeting was set, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. I had made the decision. I was done being the quiet, accommodating sister and aunt, the one who always played nice to keep the peace. I couldn't continue to stand by and let everyone push me around as if I were some invisible presence in the background. This was my moment. If I was going to save what little was left of this family, I had to step forward, stand tall, and speak my truth. When I walked into the room, my heart was pounding. The living room was filled with the usual crowd. My Aunt Margaret, who still believed she had a say in everything. My cousin Jared, who had always been quick to judge but slow to help. And Charlie, of course, sitting in the corner with his arms crossed, glaring at me. The faces of my family members were a mix of expectation and disdain, as if they were all waiting for me to apologize for the position I was in, for the responsibilities that had been thrust upon me, but I was done apologizing. I took my seat at the head of the table and cleared my throat, silencing the murmurs that had already started. The weight of everyone's gaze was heavy, but this time, I didn't flinch. This time, I would hold my ground. I know you're all upset, I began, my voice steady but firm. And I understand why. But I'm here to make it clear that I'm not the enemy. I paused, looking around the room. The sharp eyes of my relatives didn't leave me, but I could sense something else in the air, a subtle shift, a flicker of doubt in some of their faces. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just speaking to keep the peace. I was speaking because it was time for everyone to hear me. Thomas left behind a mess. I won't pretend it's easy. The debts, the lies, the confusion, it's all been hard to navigate. But I'm the one who has to figure it out now. I'm the one who has to pick up the pieces. Charlie scoffed from across the room, shaking his head, but I didn't let that stop me. He had been so consumed with his own expectations that he hadn't even considered the burden I was carrying. He thought the estate was his, but it wasn't. It never was. And it was time for him to understand that. This isn't about who gets what. This is about fixing the mess Thomas left behind. I'm the executor of this estate, and whether you like it or not, I have a duty to make sure everything is handled properly. I don't care if it's not what you thought you were going to get, I said, my voice rising with conviction. But I'm doing this fairly, for all of us, for Thomas, for the family. The room fell silent. I could feel the heat of Charlie's gaze on me, but I refused to look away. His face was twisted with anger and confusion, but I had no more apologies left to give him. I had spent my life trying to make things right for him, for everyone. But this was my moment to stop being the silent fixer. I'm tired of being the one who keeps everyone together. I'm tired of doing all the work and getting nothing but resentment in return. I've had enough of being the one who sacrifices for everyone else, while no one ever considers what I need. I've been overlooked for too long, and I won't let that happen anymore. The words spilled out of me, each one heavier than the last, but they felt liberating, like lifting a weight off my chest I didn't even realize I had been carrying. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for permission to be heard. I wasn't apologizing for doing what was right. I was demanding respect, not just as the executor of the estate, but as a person, as a sister, as an aunt. I looked at my Aunt Margaret, whose face was a mixture of shock and reluctant approval. She had always thought she knew best. But now, for the first time, she was hearing my voice. And it wasn't the quiet, deferential voice she was used to. I wasn't a child anymore. Charlie shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his arms still crossed. But now there was uncertainty in his eyes. I had taken his world, the one he thought was rightfully his, and turned it upside down. He didn't know what to do with this new version of me, the one who had no intention of backing down. You don't get to dictate how things are going to go, I said, locking eyes with Charlie. This isn't about you. This is about what's best for the family. And if you can't see that, then maybe it's time for you to stop focusing on what you think you're entitled to and start helping fix what's broken. The silence in the room was deafening. No one spoke for a long moment, and for the first time in ages, I didn't feel like I was at the mercy of my family's judgments. I wasn't pleading for their approval anymore. I had found my voice, and I was no longer afraid to use it. Finally, Jared broke the silence, his voice softer than usual. Maybe it's time we all start listening to you, Emily. I could tell it wasn't easy for him to admit, but I didn't care. I had just reclaimed my place in this family, and if anyone wanted to be part of it, they would have to respect me. They would have to understand that I wasn't just the caretaker anymore. I wasn't the one who kept things together for everyone else while being ignored. I was Emily, and I wasn't asking for permission anymore. Charlie didn't say anything. He sat there fuming, but for the first time, I saw a crack in the wall of anger he had built around himself. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand that this wasn't a fight he could win by pushing me around. Maybe, for once, he would have to accept that I was no longer the quiet one in the background. I stood up, ready to leave, but before I could make my way out of the room, Aunt Margaret spoke. You're right, Emily. We've all been so wrapped up in our own grievances that we forgot to hear you. We'll do better. For the first time in a long time, I felt heard. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. And that was enough. As I walked out of the room, I felt lighter. I had spoken my truth, and I had done it without asking for anyone's permission. I had reclaimed my voice, and no matter what happened next, I knew that I would no longer be the silent participant in my own life. This was my story to tell now. After everything, I realized my life was mine to control. The inheritance dispute wasn't resolved, but I had found something far more important, my voice. I invited a few close friends for dinner, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. There were no expectations, just genuine connections. As I sat there, I understood that I was no longer living for anyone else. I had reclaimed my identity. The estate didn't define me. I was finally in charge of my own life, and that was the true empowerment I needed. The future was mine to shape.